Black Panthers asserted their Second Amendment rights. We wouldn't have gotten the Civil Rights Act passed without the community defense work that they did. We don't need to be violent, but we should have armed, I think it said protection, or defense coalitions or something. I can't remember. TikTok cut it off here. I'm sorry about that. I'm not an expert on the Black Panthers by any means, but I did want to read a section from Revolutionary Nonviolence by Reverend James M. Lawson Jr., who was part of the civil rights movement, because he has a section here where he defines violence, and I kind of like what he has to say about it, because when I think of the Black Panthers, and other similar groups, I think it's really good to remember that self-defense is not violence. I also personally think that property destruction is not violence, and I've talked about that pretty extensively because there have been a number of authors. The book This Is an Uprising discusses this concept. It's very much cultural. In some cultures, they don't view destruction of property as violence, and in some cultures, they really do. Capitalism, right? The police are there to protect the property of the wealthy, of the capitalists. So some cultures really are like France, low-key fine with smashing shit, right? They don't consider that violence. But in the United States, it doesn't matter what our personal belief is. What really matters is the public perception. What does the overarching culture believe about destruction of property? So while I understand that vandalism has been utilized in all kinds of nonviolent resistance movements, in the United States, the press especially, and those in power, are going to couch any kind of destruction of property with that term, with that perception of it being violence. But you understand what I'm saying. Okay, so let me read this section here. So that said, I will define violence. Violence is the use of power to harass, intimidate, injure, shackle, kill, or destroy a person or persons. It is accomplishing a purpose that is negative, right? Self-defense, not negative. Violence is intimidation, harassment to persons or a village or a nation, with the result that we deprive the people we're pushing against of their right to shape their own lives and their access to the things that make life possible. So under that definition, sexism is a form of violence. Racism is a form of violence. Those are structural forms of violence. Slavery was kept in place by violence. Sexism is kept in place through the abuse of and violence against women and children. Violence is an abuse of power. It is a misuse of power. And my contention is that while many people have the power to do such things, I maintain they have no right to do such things. They are usurping rights. And remember that the Declaration of Independence declares that we hold these truths to be self-evident, that all are created equal, that all are endowed with certain unalienable rights, and among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. That is power, and violence is the abuse of power. Violence is not simply physically beating up, injuring, or killing. It's about intimidation. It's about harassment. It is about seeing other human beings as less than human. That's why I made a video yesterday about dehumanization and how important it is for us to remember our humanity, for us to remember the humanity of people on the other side, and to remind them of both as well, right? Nothing is more dangerous to the United States and to its 300 plus million people than the public conversation, the education that teaches us that we are an exceptional people and we're not like other members of the human race or the human family. What a good point. American exceptionalism is an indoctrination of the American people to dehumanize people around the world, people outside our borders and immigrants in our borders. Violence destroys rather than builds. Violence prevents human beings from putting the issues on the table and conjuring up the courage to look at them from the perspective of seeking a solution, of healing, and the sort of compromises that lead you a little bit in the right direction. Violence destroys and hates. Violence against violence escalates violence. It doesn't solve any of the human problems. I have named sexism and racism as violence. I can add materialism and greed and other isms, and these have taught many of us not to respect one another and to be suspicious of our own worth. It is not common sense to believe that I have been created in the likeness of the universe, in the likeness of life, and the likeness of God, but you haven't. And you haven't, and you haven't, and you haven't. It makes me insecure and suspicious of my own worth if I believe that other people don't exemplify the creative force that I claim for myself. Such a good point. Do you remember when I talked about how under fascism, women especially, but kind of everybody, are told we have to police our bodies constantly? We have to focus on dieting, on being smaller, taking up less space, thinking, worrying about what other people perceive about our bodies, having our bodies be presented to the world in a way that is acceptable to the regime, acceptable to the fascist society. And that when we are engaged in constantly policing our own thoughts, our own body, our own appearance, it becomes much easier for us to start policing other people. And I think Reverend Lawson really highlights this connectedness between us, right? Like what we do to ourselves, we can easily do to other people. And what we do to other people, suddenly it can become easier for us to accept when the state does those things to us. That's why I say it's our shared humanity, right? Us remembering our humanity and remembering there's dehumanization on any level, in any part of this, right? Y'all, it justifies, it validates the regime's oppression of all of us. And this point of like, if I don't believe that that person is made in God's image, because I don't really see them as a real person, I'm like low-key okay with dehumanizing them in so many ways, then suddenly it's like, okay, but I do know that we're all human. So if I don't believe that they deserve all the same rights I do, if I don't believe that they're created in the same likeness that I am, then I undercut my own belief in my own rights, right? In my own freedom, in my own humanity. It becomes that connection between the two of us of what we do to our neighbor impacts us. Our perception of the self impacts our perception of our neighbor, and vice versa. I know I got so much flack on my video where I talked about how we have to remember our humanity, like leaning into our humanity and understanding that dehumanization is like the number one, the first component of a fascist regime enacting power is getting its people to dehumanize a vulnerable group. And the first stage of genocide, the first element of war, it all starts with dehumanization. And do you see here how it all connects? So to loop it back to your initial comment here and to connect with what Reverend Lawson was saying, I don't think that self-defense is violence because it is not done in an attempt to control and coerce and to deny other people rights in their humanity. It's done in the defense of life and humanity. But then that leads to a whole other conversation that the Reverend gets to in this book, and I know a lot of other scholars of nonviolence have talked about, which is, what does self-defense look like when you choose not to engage in it in this way, right? Is this kind of self-defense necessary? What does it look like to be committed to nonviolence in a really strategic way? And how does that look different than all of the ways we've been indoctrinated to think about power, to think about control, to think about how we keep ourselves safe? Anyway, I really appreciate this comment. I think that this is a really difficult and nuanced conversation. It's not so black and white, and it's not so easy to wade into it. I think we need to look at those resistance movements throughout history in the United States and elsewhere, and also be really careful and intentional with our terminology as well.